going to start, and as others join us, we'll certainly welcome them. I want to welcome everyone for joining us. The title of our presentation tonight is Coping with Your Child's Challenging Behaviors in Uncertain Times. And uncertain times, these certainly are. And as many of you will know, today the government announced the vaccine certificates, or otherwise known as vaccine passports, which will be required for all indoor public spaces. That does create some unique challenges as we try and interpret what that means for our own settings in our workplaces. And so hopefully tonight, this will provide an opportunity for many of you to ask our panelists about how that might play out in their workplace, given that it was just announced today. So I'm sure not everyone has had that sorted out. But I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Barrett, our key speaker tonight. And I also would like to invite our panelist who will introduce to you just momentarily to provide an introduction who they are. So Dr. Barrett grew up in Southern Ontario and is absolutely loving the North. She's married and has a husband on St. Joseph. They moved into Sault Ste. Marie in 1990 after completing her training in family and adolescent medicine in Toronto. She's worked as a family group doctor at Group Health Center from 1990 until 2003. Their family moved to Ottawa from 2003 to 2008 while she completed a residency and training, and then moved back to Sault Ste. Marie in 2008. Where she set up her practice at a group health center as a child and adolescent mental health unit from her practice in 2018. Her current interests include helping parents and caregivers to support family health, family therapy, and providing education to children's mental health agencies regarding children's mental health. And so we are so privileged to have you tonight, Dr. Barrett, and thank you for that. I am going to take this opportunity now to just have each of our panelists introduce themselves. Ginny may not be there, so I'm going to then turn it to Carol Pacquiao. Carol, would you mind introducing yourself?
Certainly. Bonsoir, I'm Carole Pacquiao, the Director of Student Services for the French Public School Board, Conseil scolaire public du Grand Nord de l'Ontario.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Carol.
My pleasure.
I'm going to ask Jared if you can. I'm going to turn it to Jared to introduce himself.
Sure. Thanks, Ali. And thanks, everyone, for being here. So my name is Jared Lambert. I am the mental health lead for the Huron-Superior Catholic District School Board.
Thank you, Jared. I'm going to turn it to Brent Valley.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brent Valley. I'm Superintendent for Special Education and Mental Health for the Algoma District School Board.
Thank you for joining us, Brent. And to Michelle Cotton.
Thank you. Bonjour tout le monde. Michelle Cotte-Moire, Direction du service de bien-être et inclusion avec le Conseil scolaire catholique du Nouvel-An and with the French Catholic School Board. Thank you.
Great to have you, Michelle. Thank you for joining us. And Jeannie Barnett.
Hi, I'm Jean Barnett. I'm a clinical supervisor at Algoma Family Services. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Jeannie. I just heard that my bandwidth is kind of garbly. So with that being said, I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Barrett to do her presentation. Dr. Barrett, to you.
I am honored to be asked to speak here tonight. I want to apologize that my lighting is not very good on the camera. I tried to fix it, but I'm at that age where I'm not that technical. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the effects of the pandemic on mental health and behavior, and give a few back to school tips. But a large portion of what I want to talk about is to talk about challenging behaviors, because I think that's the way kids present themselves when things are stressful as they are now. And we're going to talk about just help you to understand what creates challenging behaviors, what are the factors involved, and a few suggestions for managing challenging behaviors. It's a big topic, so I have to try to simplify it and shorten it. Really, the idea is to add to your caregiver expertise in reading and understanding your child's behaviors, so that your interactions between the two of you will promote closer connections. I think that's something that we all need right now with all the stress that's going on. So there have been a lot of surveys about the effects of the pandemic on mental health. There was one Canadian survey that was recently done and showed that 84% of Canadian adults report a decline in their mental health. And that includes problems such as anxiety, depression, binge drinking, loneliness. And of course, that's probably no surprise to anybody, but it just helps us to put in perspective that we're all feeling the stress. So we're all in this very difficult place. And of course, this affects our kids as well. There's something called Kids Help Phone, which is a service that kids can call in to get help. They can also text to get help. And it's a very useful service. And they have found with the pandemic, there's been a 350% increase in requests for service from that agency or that service. And the things that they found that particularly kids are concerned about are things like anxiety, struggles with social isolation, eating and body image issues, and substance abuse concerns. And in that particular group of kids, it's mostly more prominent in ages 12 to 15. And of course, with all of this social isolation and with virtual learning, there's been increased screen time in youth. One study in California showed that social media use has been up by 63%. And of course, video gaming and all kinds of screen time have increased. And that's a concern to me as a person who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist, because we know that excessive screen time has been shown to increase the risk of depression, anxiety, suicide, inattention, poor sleep, and feelings of isolation and low self-esteem. So that's only going to add to already the worries, et cetera, that everyone has. So as parents, you know what, there's a lot of worries and concerns about the upcoming school year. There's a magazine called Parents Magazine. It's an American magazine. They did a survey, and the top concerns for parents about their concerns, about their children returning to school, 45% was their child's social skills and friendships. 45% was their child's attention span or staying engaged in school. 3% were concerned about the mental health of their child, and 41% their motivation to do well. There's also obviously lots of reports of concerns of parents about technology overuse and balancing the use of technology for school with social needs. And the editor-in-chief of Parents Magazine, I read a quote from her that the pressure has been created by concerns about making up for a lost year. So as parents, obviously this past year has just been incredibly difficult with school. And so it's almost like this idea we've got to make up for this lost year where we've lost social skills, academic skills. And I think one of the things to keep in mind is that everybody's in the same boat. There's no competition there. And so hopefully that can help to take some of that pressure off, but it's a very real concern. Now, anytime kids go back to school, I'm calling this behavior shifts. We need to go from our summertime leisure behavior to back to school routines. And as caregivers, you're all very aware of what all those changes are, the shifts in behavior, waking up earlier and schedules with meals and stuff like that. But I think this year in particular, compared to other years, those needs for those behavior shifts are going to be it's going to be a little harder to shift behavior because there's been a longer period of time away from school and more social distancing, although that's lifted a bit over the summer. So I think some of the things that kids normally would experience going back to school might be accentuated. So for instance, I've highlighted leaving caregivers to attend school. So again, all of this extra time being with family for some kids is going to make it even harder. Other things, as we mentioned in a previous slide, kids are always a bit concerned about how social interactions are going to go coming back to school. And that's going to be a challenge more so this year. The other thing is, when your kids are home, they can let their emotions out a little more. They feel like they're more in a safe place. But when they're in the school setting, they have to kind of keep things level. And that's sort of, again, there's more emotions now. We've got tough emotion level, and we're not used to being in the school environment for such a long period of time. It's going to be difficult. And with that comes that whole thing that happens after school, when the kids get home from school, that whole thing about what do you do with those emotions you suppressed all day and they let them out. I also highlighted the idea of the shift in getting to bed on time that has to occur before going back to school. And just to highlight that sleep is very much a very important factor in mental health. So if there's any one thing that you can really focus on, it's trying to get your kids on a better sleep schedule before school starts, because it's essential for brain function, essential for emotion function, for everything. So, there's all kinds of tips for back to school, how to deal with back to school. And I just want to kind of focus on a few things. Obviously, making gradual adjustments to routine starting now is a very important tip. And I think most of you know that you can't just start getting your kids back in routine the night before the first day of school, because it's going to be a lot tougher. But one of the things that is pointed out a lot in these tips for back to school is consider your child's perspective about what returning to school means to them this year in particular, because it's a different year. There's, worries about masks and am I going to get sick? And, there's all kinds of things. And it's important to discuss your child's perspective, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I think the other thing we need to really expect that there is going to be a range of emotional and behavior responses in your child and yourself. And those emotional behavior responses may not be the same every day. They may change. Just when you get used to one reaction, you might see another one. And I think that we can expect that for all of us. So I think normalizing that and understanding that's going to be an issue. And so a lot of, when you're reading tips for back to school, they talk about communication. And this is very important, to communicate with your child regularly, particularly during these times of transition when there's lots of stress. And the important thing, I think, for some of us, communicating means us talking to our child, but I think we have to look at both sides of communication. So listening and validating, those are two really important things when your child is discussing what's going on. And the other thing is, talking during shared activities is probably a better idea when you're talking about feelings, because if you say to your child, we're going to sit down and have a talk about feelings, that can be hard, and kids don't always talk that well during those kind of sort of forced conversations. So I think trying to bring it up during shared activities is important. The other thing, if your child comes up to you and says, hey, I've got something I'm worried about, and if you're in the middle of something and can't talk to them about it, to say, hey, I hear you. I'm really busy with something right now, and let's set up a time to talk after supper. Now, again, I just said something about not having planned talks, but the thing I'm trying to say is to offer a time to talk later and to follow up on that. And the other thing, when we use the word validate, what validate means is that you are saying to your child that their feelings, their own feelings about what's going on, are valid. And that really means, the big one is, don't tell them what they should be feeling. And a lot of times we're tempted to do that. When someone says, oh, I'm scared, you say, oh, you don't need to be scared. There's nothing to be scared of. That's not validating. That's telling them what they should be feeling or not feeling. And so it can be really hard, because as parents, we want to take pain away. We want to fix things. But there is great value in a child being able to express themselves and being validated, and they're more likely to come to you again with their feelings if they feel validated. If they feel unvalidated, they're not as likely to come and talk to you. And if it's hard for you to sort of know how to approach these subjects, there are, and a lot of these, I'm going to give you some information about some websites that have this information, but sometimes if you just plan a script beforehand of how you're going to bring it up, like, I know that this is going to be a tough year for you. I see that I'm wondering if you're having some feelings of worry, and I'm here to talk to you, and you know what, I'm here to help you, and we can do it together. You're not alone in this. If your child's feeling particularly negative about it, it can be helpful to brainstorm with them about positives, and then have those positives in your back pocket to talk about when they start to tell you their feelings are quite negative. Again, you validate, hey, yeah, you're worried about that, but let's remember there's some positives to think about. And you're always going to see, anywhere where you see tips for parents, it's always going to talk about practicing self-care. And of course, this is essential, and I'm not going to not include that in my list. So I think that, that concept of when you're on an airplane and the plane's going down and the oxygen comes down, you have to put the mask on first, so you can help your child. And that's really important. And the other thing is, in life, when there's so much out of our control, focusing on the things you can change or you can control, even small things for you or your child, is very helpful. Now, the last two things that I'm going to talk about on the slide are keeping lines of communication open with the school. And that, I think, is key, especially if you're noticing your child struggling ahead of time, to let them know, hey, I've been noticing this, and can you let me know how they're getting along at school? And together with the school, you can help to brainstorm some ways to help to support your child on an ongoing basis. And lastly, again, I mentioned that these are really tough times, and I think everyone needs to be realistic of their expectations for themselves and for their child, and to show some self-compassion. And these are difficult times. Things are not going to be perfect, and that's okay. And if you have a bad day, tomorrow is a new day. So in keeping with some of what I've discussed on these tips for back to school, we've kind of talked about understanding your child's perspective and communicating. And I think one of the things that we need to understand is kids aren't going to necessarily come right out and tell you how they're feeling. And that's because of the level of development their brain is at. And so the way that we're going to know if our kid's struggling is by behavior. So behavior, just in keeping with this talk, we're going to talk about behavior as being a form of communication in the form of an observable action. And this communication expresses a need or an emotion, and it may be a response to a request from an adult or a caregiver. And so really, it allows what's inside the head, inside the brain, thoughts and feelings that are usually unconscious to show outside. Now, because kids, their brain hasn't developed to the same level, their language skills and emotion regulation skills mean that it's just natural. They might have difficulty putting emotions into words and to explain things with their language skills, or even to try to respond to you if something's troubling them and they don't feel capable of doing something that you're asking of them. They don't have that ability. It's on a spectrum, but so their communication comes in the form of behavior. And I think we all know that. And as caregivers, we become experts in reading behavior language, starting from when your child is a baby. When they're a baby, they can't speak. So they will tell you that they're in discomfort by crying or fussing. And you learn to, figure out what it is that they need. But that need still carries on even when kids become verbal. And we sometimes forget that we need to continue to be experts in reading their behavior language. So in this talk, I wanted to talk a bit about challenging behaviors, because I think that's what we're going to be seeing in our kids as they struggle. And what do I mean by challenging behaviors? Well, they're difficult to manage behaviors that challenge you in many ways as a parent. And so they challenge your position as an authority figure, your parenting skills, frustration level, your ability to remain calm and flexible in your responses to their behaviors and words, your feeling of competency as a caregiver, and your perceptions of your child and yourself. They affect the emotional climate in your home. And importantly, the perceptions and reactions of extended family, teachers, principals, and peers. So there's many, many things that could be called a challenging behavior. So they really are, again, still a form of communication. So here's an example. You ask your daughter to go to bed, getting ready for back to school, need to have a better bedtime. Your daughter slumps on the couch, crosses her arms and says no. So, well, she is communicating. And what is she communicating? She doesn't want to go to bed. And then a lot of times our brain jumps to this, well, why is she doing this? Particularly now when I'm tired, she just likes to be difficult. She always wants to clear away. And oftentimes we'll jump to the negative. And frequently when adults are looking at kids and interpreting their behaviors, they come up with a couple of sort of main topics or main incentives for behavior. So one is motivation. So if you don't have motivation, you don't want to do something. So, that brings up in our mind things like she's not trying hard enough. She hasn't learned her lesson about how to behave. I haven't been tough enough on her. And the other thing that we as adults often see when we see challenging behaviors, we'll often think about they don't know how to respect. They don't, the kid says, you can't make me do this. And then we think things like, well, she doesn't know who's the boss. She always wants to get her way. She knows how to push my buttons. And, grandparents might be making comments that kids these days are spoiled. So these are common interpretations that we as adults have of child behaviors. And there might be other needs or emotions that she's communicating. And when we're at our best and our calmest, we often will be able to sort this out. But it's important to think about this. She could be saying, I'm having fun and I don't want the fun to stop. I don't want to miss out on anything. But she could also be trying to tell you that she's afraid of the dark. She could also be trying to tell you that I want to spend more time with you because you seem stressed. I'm scared something will happen to you when I'm away from you in bed overnight. And again, they don't have the ability to put this into words, but their behavior is telling you that. Now, I remember I mentioned earlier that a lot of us jump to motivation being the issue when we see a challenging behavior. And what motivation theories suggest is that a child doesn't obey because they don't want to, or they're not trying hard enough. And many caregivers have been taught that targeting motivation is really the only way or the best way to help children to behave, particularly from the older generations. So this is sort of simplistic definition of motivation. Motivation is the reason to act in a particular way, a desire or willingness to act, enthusiasm for a particular action. So, motivation, there certainly is that does play a part in behaviors. And so how do we enhance motivation? So we enhance motivation usually with rewards to increase the likelihood of an expected or desired behavior because something pleasant is going to happen. So if I do what's asked of me, I will get something good. Or we use punishments to lessen the likelihood of an undesirable behavior because something unpleasant will happen. So if I do this, there will be a negative consequence. I'll pay for it. So punishments and rewards add motivation for you to perform the request, for the child to perform your request. But it only works if the child already possesses the skills required to process your request and respond to your request. And so we always have to be careful we're not asking more of our child than they're capable of, particularly when they have certain challenges or certain mental health diagnoses or certain ways their brain's wired. The other thing is, for kids and adults, we need to feel capable and confident in order to be motivated. So those are important things to remember. You can use rewards and benefit and punishments, but you have to have the skills required to perform what's being asked of you, and you have to feel capable and confident. And to understand that a little bit more, let's just look a little bit more closely at the brain. I am a medical doctor, so I'm very interested in the way the brain works. So first of all, this whole thing, adults know better. She'll be cranky tomorrow if she doesn't go to bed now. Well, in fact, adults' brains do work differently than kids, and in some ways they do know better. Kids' brains aren't adult brains. They're less logical, less future-oriented, which means future-oriented means if I do this now, this is going to happen in the future. They have more difficulty delaying gratification. They have more difficulty with problem solving and organizing responses. And all of those sort of abilities of the brain are what we call executive function. Executive function just means there's a part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, which kind of is the boss of the brain. It coordinates everything. And that prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until age 25. So when we expect children and teens and young adults to understand their consequences in the same way that we do, consequences of actions the same way we do, it's harder for them. Their brain just doesn't work that way. And sometimes we expect them to know these things that their brain just doesn't know to. So just going back to the brain, like what happens when a caregiver asks their child to do something? So what steps are required in the brain to go from a caregiver making a request of their child to the requested behavior actually being performed? So this next slide is going to look a little busy, but it's just for me to try to simplify and explain something. So I've come up with this idea of a behavior ladder. So again, you don't need to know all these different steps. The behavior ladder is the steps the child has to go through in their brain to go from being asked to do something to performing the behavior. And it doesn't all fit on the thing here, but so I think the one thing I want you to see is that yes, motivation is part of it, but there are many other things the brain needs to do. And that the very first step is that the nervous system has to be calm in order to start climbing the behavior ladder to get to the behavior that's asked of them. So all of these things happen very automatically in the brain, outside of awareness, in a split second. Malfunctions can occur in one area or many areas. And when a malfunction occurs, it's not necessarily deliberate or planned. And the thing is that the same thing that's happening in your child's brain is also happening in your own brain in response to whatever behavior they give you. So some youth are wired differently and I put brain differences in quotations just because, everyone's brain is a little different, and some brain differences make it difficult to climb that behavior ladder. And these brain differences may or may not come with an official mental health diagnosis. So this next slide, again, is going to look a little busy, but I'll explain it. So this is the first step, calm nervous system. And on the left-hand side, you're going to see I've listed brain differences, ways that kids' brains can be a little different to make it hard for them to have a calm nervous system. And I've listed on the right side different diagnoses, mental health diagnoses that make it hard for a kid to have a calm nervous system in certain settings. And so, again, not to go over all of those things, but one of the brain differences is feeling stressed out. Well, obviously, we've got a lot of stress going on now, so it's hard to have that calm nervous system. And in order to be open to receive information and to have your brain skills ready to operate, you have to have a calm nervous system. So this is going to be a problem right now and in different situations more so. Now I'm going to flip through the rest of these very quickly because in the interest of time, but I'm going to, well, actually, I'll go back to motivation. So motivation is also important. The child needs to feel capable. They need to understand the consequences, be willing to act, and delay gratification. So again, many steps to get to the desired response. So how does stress contribute to challenging behaviors? When we go back to that ladder, we see that the level of activation of something in the brain, and I'm going to explain it in a minute, it's the danger detection system is what I'm going to call it. We have that system in our brain, and it's related to multiple factors, including experiences we've had, differences in our brains, mental health diagnoses, current environment. And that affects that first step, the calm nervous system. So the danger detection system, again, that's just a terminology I've come up with, but there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, and we have to have this system in our brain from the time of birth to keep us safe and alive. It works by detecting life-threatening danger in our environment. And when the danger is detected, our brain and our body go on a kind of a red alert. And the result is these automatic unconscious behaviors, and you may have heard the terminology of fight or flight, but there's also a freeze reaction. And so it's in our interests it's an interest for our survival that we have this system in our brain. But when it's active, it overrides the other parts of the brain. So the part of the brain that does the executive function that I just discussed, the thinking and reasoning, gets overridden by this part of the brain. So in that moment, you're not really thinking properly, and you certainly can't learn properly. And that's when often the time when a kid's in one of these fight flight responses, sometimes that's when we want most as adults to use our words to teach our kid a lesson. And that those words may not be even getting registered in their brain. And again, this is not on purpose. It's not planned. This is what happens automatically in the brain. So some kids are wired differently, or they have a diagnosis that affects them. So their brain is almost on constant red alert. So even when there's no life-threatening danger, that danger detection system is on red alert. And when the nervous system isn't calm, it's very difficult to climb that behavior ladder to respond to a caregiver request. So initially, when we were cavemen, we needed this in our brain. If we had a saber-toothed tiger in front of us, we needed to either stay and fight or take off. There's also a freeze response, for instance, when you see like the idea of a bunny rabbit that's sort of camouflaged, it will freeze in one place to try to blend in with the background, so it won't be, it won't have movement for someone to for its predator to detect its movement. So there's those three kinds of automatic reactions, and when it's happening in a non life or death situation, it comes out with behaviors in kids. And so these behaviors can be things like the fight response can look like arguing, getting on the defensive, swearing, blaming, saying hateful things, yes, getting physical. And the flight response can, yes, cause a child to run out of the room, but it can also be a little more subtle. So it's avoiding doing something or making excuses or lying. It's sort of trying to get oneself out of a situation. And freezing is when kids might avoid or shut down or refuse to act. So often, what we see as a challenging behavior, there could be some of this going on. The other thing is just to try to understand some of your kids' behaviors is that kids need to be attached to an adult. When you're a newborn, you're completely helpless and you need an adult in your life to keep you safe and respond to your needs because you're unable to care for yourself. And so kids need to feel safe with their caregiver. And most kids have an attachment and they feel safe. But with that, what helps them to feel safe is to feel consistently and unconditionally loved, even if they make a mistake or upset their caregiver. So if they do something that they know might displease their caregiver or might get them in trouble, that might set off the danger detection system because there's a threat to the system of losing a caregiver's love and a caregiver's keeping you safe. So this feels unsafe and sets off one of these what I call a false alarm. It feels like you're in imminent danger. And it can also be triggered when kids are worried about the mental health of their caregiver or physical health, that they're worried that that person that keeps them safe, something bad might happen to them. So all of these things can trigger an unwarranted fight, flight, or freeze reaction. Again, setting off that whole idea of not being able to climb the behavior ladder because the nervous system is not calm. So those are some things about the brain. And going back to behaviors. Now, this is one thing, things in the environment can affect behavior, and there's things we can modify sometimes, or we can change environments. And these are things that caregivers are experts at. And most of us are very good. When our kids are little, we know when they get hot or cold or hungry or need to go to the bathroom, we might see some behaviors, and we kind of learn how to, deal with that. And as kids grow, those kinds of things change, but these are always things we need to keep in mind when we're seeing challenging behaviors. Are any of these things, affecting them? And are there things that we can adjust to decrease the likelihood of behaviors? Things even like if the level of stimulation is too low or too high, or transitioning too quickly from one activity to another. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. But I would like to spend a little bit of time on this last sort of area about our care as a caregiver. What do we bring to the table in these interactions when there's challenging behaviors? And I think we all know this and need to understand this, so, and bring it into our consciousness, that we interpret our kids' challenging behaviors through our own filters. And that filter is influenced by things, that have happened to you in your life, and the way you, but it's how we take in what they're doing and how we register it in our brain. It has to do with all kinds of things, how we feel about ourselves, our world, our kids. So perceptions can be very strong when your kid is behaving in challenging ways. And oftentimes we tend to go for the negative perception, right? What's wrong with my kid? Why does she always push my buttons? Why can't she behave? Why doesn't she respect me? People will think I'm a bad parent. Maybe I am a bad parent. And when I was a kid, I respected my elders. And why does this always happen when I'm having a bad day? So these are all those things that pop in our head when we see what our child's doing. And so we're perceiving this is a bad behavior. This is not something I want to see. So when we do this inside our heads, when we label what our child's doing, this affects our own emotions, the words that we will use in the interaction with our child, our tone of voice, our body language, what we actually do. But it also influences how your child reads you and how they respond to you. And we have to be very careful, especially when it comes to challenging behaviors, because we do a lot of labeling in a shaming way. So, these behaviors are disrespectful, attention-seeking, overly sensitive, manipulative, controlling, stubborn. So I use that word shame, and I just want to clarify that a little bit, because I don't know if some of you may have heard of Brené Brown. She does a lot of work online. She's got some great books about shame, but she helps to delineate between guilt, embarrassment, and shame. So guilt is when you regret something you did, and it's usually because you went against your morals or your values. And embarrassment is worrying about being judged for something you did. But shame is a different thing. Shame is believing that you are defective and unlovable. And shaming demolishes self-esteem and self-confidence, and it can trigger that danger detection system I talked about. So shaming is not the same as guilting someone, but it can have a very powerful effect on ourselves and our child. And there's a lot of shaming of caregivers that goes on. People use terminologies like too permissive, too harsh, inconsistent, and we do it to ourselves too. We compare, and sometimes we get unwanted opinions from others. So I think it's important for you to recognize when you're shaming yourself and practice self-compassion, and know that we are all doing the best we can in this moment. And if we're having a bad moment, we take a breather and start again. But shaming ourselves just adds to all of this difficulty. Now, also in keeping with caregiver perceptions is this other idea that we have certain expectations. And expectations, how we wish our child would act, who we think they should be, who others think they should be. And we develop what's called mental models. These are these ideas we develop in our head. They're kind of like the shoulds. So you take your values, your wishes, dreams, fantasies, and you shape a model of what you think the ideal child should be, or what the ideal parent should be, and what the ideal parent-child relationship is. And it's developed from our upbringing, experiences, societies, messages, all kinds of things. But when something doesn't meet with our idea of the ideal, we can be really harsh on ourselves, and we can bring up a lot of these feelings. And it's about what we say people should be or should do, as opposed to what they can be or can do. And some kids have challenges, and sometimes we're expecting them to be a certain way that they can't be. And I think that's something we always have to keep in mind. So what if when your child is showing you a behavior or not doing what you ask them to do? And so we say, oh, well, they won't do it. But what if they can't do it? It's not that they will not do it, it's that they can't do it. So going back and looking at those things I talked about, what if they lack the required brain skills to climb that behavior ladder? Maybe they've not been developed yet, or they have a brain difference or a mental health diagnosis. And what if their danger detection system is being alerted because maybe there's been a lot of negative interactions, and remember I said sometimes their fear, the loss of their parents' love, and it can set off these red alerts. Or what if there's things going on in the environment or conditions that make it difficult for them in that moment to use the skills that are required to do what you're asking them to do? Or what if your own perceptions and expectations are affecting the way that you're interacting with your child? Your words, your body language. What if you're somehow conveying negative thoughts about your child or shame? That can set off that danger detection system as well. And all of these things may add up to the point that the child may be unable to produce the requested response in this moment. It's not that it's not a motivation thing. It's an actual being unable to do what you're asking of them. Because I think if we look at it, most kids deep down inside are motivated. I call it invisible motivation. Most kids already know that you're the boss and they truly want to please you. And deep down, kids have good intentions. And they may be very motivated, but it's just not showing in the way that you'd like to see it. Again, that's about, expectations. So if you're seeing a challenging behavior in the moment, sometimes it's important to ask, what task am I expecting my child to do? Is my child usually capable of doing this task? If they're not doing this task, what's getting in the way, and what can I change now in this moment? So again, this is hard. We can't always do this, but the way that we can adjust how we deal with behaviors is to try to look at things differently. So change your lens of how you look at things and look at it with curiosity, not judgment. Starting out with the assumption my child has good intentions, but for some reason they're behaving this way. Always important when you're asking them to do something, do they actually have, what are the skills required to perform this behavior? Like saying, go do your homework. But what if the kid has a learning disability or ADHD or things that get in the way of performing the requested behavior? And the second thing is to put yourself in their shoes. And what could my child be feeling right now? And what are they trying to communicate to me with this behavior? Look inside yourself. What are your own perceptions, expectations, and feelings in this moment? And how could that be interfering in this interaction and playing into the challenging behavior? And again, this is where we can generate hypotheses. What could be making it hard for my child to perform this behavior right now? And going back to that behavior ladder that I showed you, the nervous system needs to be calm. So we know that we need to soothe emotions first, validate emotions, soothe and calm. When we bring things down, it's easier to deal with the behavior. So don't try to offer support when things are still elevated. And if we know that certain behaviors or certain situations are going to result in challenging behaviors, plan ahead. Identify some, the top 3 challenging behaviors about going back to school, rate them in order of their current abilities, and tackle the easiest one first, and try to sit down and look at things in this way that I'm discussing and see if you can tweak it somehow and see where you can make changes. So, where are things getting stuck? Is it brain differences? Is my child capable of this task in general? Maybe they need some help developing the necessary skills, and are they confident enough to use their skills? And read the temperature, the emotional temperature. Is the danger detection system going off now? And sometimes we have things in our brain called mirror neurons as parents, and we can read off of our child's, we can read off their mirror neurons, and we can understand their emotional state. So it can be a helpful thing to, how am I feeling right now? That might give you a clue how your child's feeling right now. And is there anything you can do to calm everyone down? And are there things I can modify about the environment, or feed them, let them go to the bathroom? And then this other more difficult part, what labels am I using right now? Are my expectations reasonable? And can I adjust my expectations? So again, if you know that your child has behaviors that are going to act up in time, making a proactive plan, accommodating things if they have, there's a thing that they always have difficulty with, or help them to build skills and self-confidence. Trying to keep the danger detection system from going off to avoid fight or flight and freeze responses is avoiding fights that aren't worth it. And again, making sure that your expectations are reasonable. So that doesn't mean that there's not a place for motivational techniques. It means that we need to understand them in the context of everything else. So what we do know is, when they do studies on motivation, is that lack of success makes the nervous system less calm and decreases the ability to use whatever yourself. So that's where we talk about modifying tasks to ensure initial success, then gradually increasing the difficulty. And because the early success helps them build confidence to keep going. And the other thing is, when you're trying to get your child to do a behavior that may be difficult for them, to reward their efforts at trying to learn the new skills to do that behavior, not the finished product, i.e. they don't have to do the perfectly formed behavior asking for, but they're approximating it, they're getting towards it. And another thing that when you read the motivational literature, if you have one failure, you need 3 successes after that to feel confident and confident enough to keep trying. So that's where that modifying things to allow for success can be really important. So this talk is just to give you some things to think about. Obviously, I don't have a magic answer here, but I think that if you try to make some of these changes, and with practice over and over again, caregivers and children can experience success, which in turn will increase confidence, motivation, and increase the likelihood that both you and your child will learn some new skills to negotiate these challenging behaviors. And the idea here is working together to help with the behaviors, as opposed to leaving your child to figure it out themselves. That will enhance your connection with them. You already know their behavior language. You already have some of these skills. Absolutely. It's just changing your perspective. And sometimes initially you need to be the emotion regulator and behavior organization for your child until they can develop those skills over time. Remember that the prefrontal cortex doesn't develop fully till age 25. They may not be able to plan and organize things as you wish them to do. The other thing is, if your child has a mental health diagnosis, it's important to understand just not the label they've been given, but how does that diagnosis affect the brain skills required to respond to requests? Remember, I showed you that behavior ladder. Does that diagnosis affect the activation of the danger detection system? How do environmental factors affect this diagnosis? And importantly, how are your own perceptions and expectations affected by this label? For instance, if you think, hey, my child has depression. Well, I think that depression is something you just need to suck it up and learn to not have negative thoughts. Now, that perception, it has an expectation your child just needs to somehow shift something in their brain and not be depressed, or not be anxious. And so your own perceptions and expectations can show in how you interact with your child and affect their behavior. So I'm going to finish up with a few thoughts. Your child knows you're the boss, wants you to love them, and wants to please you. They want to do well. They have good intentions, but unconscious processes, that's important, unconscious processes get in the way. You're part of this whole thing because your children read your perceptions through your words and body language, and that affects their own perceptions about themselves and their ability to do what they're asked to do. Remember what I said, that kids need to feel capable and confident in order to be motivated. To develop their skills, kids need to see your confidence that they can learn and grow and find new ways to respond. I hope that this was a very brief talk. I packed a lot into this talk. So not just, I'm trying to get, this is about the pandemic, but right now more than ever, we need to understand our kids' challenging behaviors. And I hope that this helps you to have a different perspective when it comes to challenging behaviors, especially now as they return to school. And we know from research that small changes in your own perspective can result in small shifts in behavior on your part that can then translate to shifts in behavior in your child. And with time, with patience, practice, and self-compassion, you can learn as you go, because nothing ever goes perfectly. But that things. So I'm hoping that we can somehow get this out to you, this information, but I've got a couple of websites. School Mental Health Ontario has a great back to school support package. So does Children's Mental Health Ontario. One thing about Children's Mental Health Ontario also, they have a lot of stuff about peer support there, which I think sometimes can be really helpful if you're really struggling. So that's an interesting, those are some interesting resources. These are some background things on some of the concepts I used in my talk. This is again, this is Dr. Broskring number 3 here, but he has some really good approaches to helping your kids to build skills in pressure tolerance and flexibility. I'm not going to talk about that, but it's interesting stuff. Now, I've just got up here questions. Now, I don't know how much time we have for questions, but I did just want to say that I can't really answer questions about specific problems with kids. This is not really the forum with confidentiality, etc. So I can't really be answering questions directly about a specific behavior or concern. But I do think that, we are here to talk about resources. And if you're struggling with things, that's one of the things is that we've got the Algoma Family Services here and that's the school boards to help out with that as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Barrett. I think I'm coming in garbly, so I'll turn my video off. We do have some questions that did come in, but I do want to just share with you some demographic information, if I can. And so, of the respondents who registered, we have the vast majority representing 18 from the Algoma District School Board, 9 from the Huron-Superior Catholic District School Board, 4 from the Catholic French Board, and 2 from the Public French Board, and 2 other. And so of the respondents here, or participants, 23 have children in grades 1 to 6, 9 had kids going to JKSK, 7 were in grade 7 and 8, and 7 are going into grade 9 and 12. So some of the questions that were provided here, and you did cover some of that in your presentation, but we'll start with the first one. What services are available to children struggling with anxiety over COVID? Again, you did mention some of these, so I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to add to that.
I think there really are, I haven't included all that. There's all kinds of resources online now for helping kids to understand about COVID. And I think I don't have any sort of magic one size fits all, but I think answering questions that they have about it and telling them that as a parent, you're there to try to support them. But I don't know if there's anything specific that Algoma Family Services has, but I do know that there's lots of resources online for kids.
Okay, very good. So the remainder of the questions, I'm going to invite you, Dr. Barrett, to also join the panel in answer to the questions. So at this point, we're going to invite our panel to answer the questions. And what I'll do is I'll simply state the question and invite you as panelists to provide a response. And we'll try not to trip over each other that way, just to make the most of the time that we have left. So all the panelists, and thank you all again for sharing your time with us tonight. We greatly appreciate you being with us. The first question is, how do we access student mental health services within each school board, both elementary and secondary schools? So maybe I'll just start off with you, Brent.
Sure, thanks, Ellie. So the answer to that question is a little bit different if we're looking at the elementary or secondary level. So I'll speak to the elementary level first. So all of our elementary schools in ADSB have a school and attendance counselor that is assigned to the school. Usually at the elementary level, they'll cover a grouping. It's usually about 3 schools each. They can take referrals from anybody connected to the school community. So that could be referral coming in from a parent who reaches out to the school and is looking for support for their child. Could be from a teacher, could be from the principal or vice principal. Lots of times it comes through the principal or vice principal. So we always encourage anybody that's looking to get support for their student, reach out to your principal or vice principal, and they're the person that's best situated to make it happen. At the secondary level, it's a little bit different. In our elementary panel, we require parental permission to work with the student. So parents do have to sign off, give their consent for their child to see the counselor. At the secondary level, with the age of the students can self-refer. So lots of them will do, we have a school and attendance counselor assigned to each school. They'll take drop-ins, so kids can drop by the guidance department. They book an appointment to see the counselor. That's fine. At the secondary level, they also take referrals from any school-based personnel or parents as well. The other support piece that we kind of have available for a number of our students is we also have a few mental health workers. Their caseload is referred by the school counselor. So if we have a school counselor that's working with a student that thinks they're in need of a little bit extra support or additional, then they can make a referral to one of the mental health workers. And that tends to be focused at the secondary level as well.
Thank you very much, Brent. I also invite the participants, if there's any questions or comments that you might have with any of our panelists, please to put that in the chat or raise your hand just to let us know. I'm going to invite Carol to answer the same question. How do we access student mental health services in your board, elementary and secondary?
Similar to what Brett was saying, at the elementary level, we do need parental consent when the children are less than 12 years old. So again, just talk to your teacher, principal. They will go ahead and do the referral. We work with a partner. It's the CENO, which is the Consortium pour les élèves du Nord de l'Ontario. They offer social workers to help out with their students. So once we have the request from the parents, we ask consent to share with the CENO, and then the social worker will come in and see the student. At the high school level, similarly, they're over 12 years old, they can self-refer. So they just go to the guidance counselor or talk to the principal. They can sign up, and when the social worker from the CENO has her day at that school, well, then they can meet up with her and get whatever services they need then.
Thank you, Carol. This next question I'm going to pose to both Jared and Michelle. So perhaps we can start with you, Michelle. Are there wait times for school mental health services, your board?
Donc, au Conseil scolaire catholique du Nouvel-An, and I cannot speak on behalf of every board, but there's an average wait time of, I'll say, 2 to 3 weeks. So we try to see most students within the 2 weeks after referral. Our services are brief intervention, non-crisis. So if there is a crisis, we would refer to or do a warm handoff, communicate with family, and guide them to the resources within the community, or be accessing mobile crisis to come to the school.
Merci, thank you. Michelle, I'm going to turn that question over to you. Jared, for the wait times for school mental health services.
Thanks, Ali, and thanks, Michelle. So very much like Michelle was saying, we would have a similar structure to that. There may occasionally, it depends on the situation. Each one of our schools is outfitted with at least one counselor. So in terms of wait times, it really depends on the time of year, what the referral's for, what day that school might be expecting their counselor to come. Would definitely be within a week or two. But when it comes to wait lists, we don't maintain any wait lists. So once a student is referred, they're on that counselor's caseload. And then, those counselors can engage the student, the family, and the work that's done really depends on the age of that student as well. So when it comes to, say, a referral that's made for a kindergartner as opposed to a referral that's made for, a grade 10, something like that, the work looks quite different, but our counselors get involved very quickly.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jared. This next question I'll pose to you, Jeannie. Are there wait times for Algoma Family Services mental health services?
Well, when you first come to AFS, you will be offered a single therapy session. So you'll have a session with a counselor right away. And from there, you'll get referred to either intake or to alternatives for youth or any other counseling that's available at the agency. We have counselors that go in the schools, and the vice principals and the teachers and even the students themselves can access that counselor. And so we try to be right on site with the kids in all the high schools and in all the grade 7 and 8s. And but yeah, there can be a wait, but we try to mitigate that wait with interventions like the single therapy session and group sessions. So, and then the other thing that we have, Ali, is we have the 12, I think it's 13 to 15 or 18, the boardroom or the Northern Outlet, and Annie is here. If she could just talk about that for a minute, because this is something that the teens can access.
Thank you, Jeannie, and we'll turn it over to you, Annie. Please introduce yourself. And
hi, good evening to all the parents and caregivers out there. Yeah, my name is Annie. Yeah, it's very interesting to talk about this topic and the stigmatized mental health and well-being of children and youth here in Algoma. I can definitely relate to some of the issues that happen at community level with my own family, but I can also see lots of resiliency and great care and flexibility in these uncertain times. So I am the new youth family engagement facilitator at Algoma Family Services. And thanks so much, Jen, for letting me tiny bit here around the Northern Outlet. So what is the Northern Outlet? It is a safe virtual space for youth in the Algoma District to participate in virtual activities, check out what's happening, and know of new resources in Algoma. And it aims to help youth connect, learn, and create during the pandemic. We're definitely thinking about how to best reach our youth as well after the pandemic, hopefully with in-person activities. And of course, following all the necessary public health protocols that will happen in the future. So there is something called the boardrooms, and they are weekly hosted activities that are live free events hosted through Zoom. And I will be facilitating some of these, and some other times youth or other partners from different organizations will be facilitating these. So I definitely invite youth from 13 to 18 to participate. I see that there are parents here, and these activities are 100% free. Each boardroom session is accompanied by a moderator, and it's ensure that it's as much as possible a safe virtual space.
You have a poster that's on our website and on our Facebook page, and I think it's going to get posted in the chat.
Yes, I will post. I will post my information just in a tiny bit in the chat when I'm done my little spiel, and I will let you know about that. Oh, I wanted to let you know about that. For kids that need volunteer hours, these can be counted as volunteer hours, weekends, volunteer hours. So it's really a great resource to be out there, that you know, that some kids and youth can benefit from. Yes, so I will then just go ahead and post it in the chat. Thank you so much for letting me talk a little bit more about this. And you can just reach us through our social media channels and through my email that I will be putting on the chat right now. Thank you.
Wonderful, Annie. Thank you for sharing that great resource. So the next question, I'm going to invite all the panelists to answer. And this question is how to access these services in rural areas. So I'll just invite any one of the panel members to take that question on, how to access these services in rural areas.
Well, I'll just talk about Algoma Family Services briefly. We have offices in Wawa and in Elliott Lake. And we also have services available through the walk-in service in Sault Ste. Marie, because we offer that service for, virtually and for the whole of Algoma District. So people can call in weekly and get support if they need it.
Thank you, Jeannie. Anyone else?
For our school board, pour les régions d'Algoma qui sont des régions plus rurales, c'est la même façon que dans où c'est plus urbain, disons, au Sceaux. Donc, vous pouvez parler à la direction, aux orienteurs ou quand l'équipe en travail social se rend dans les écoles, vous pouvez les approcher aussi. Donc, c'est la même façon qui a été expliquée tantôt quand on a demandé comment accéder aux services dans nos écoles. N'oubliez pas que ce sont des services brefs et puis on aide à faire le pont aux services de Algoma Family Services ou autres services dans la communauté.
Merci.
Yeah, I was just going to add for our schools, it's essentially the same process in all of our schools, whether they're either Sault Ste. Marie based or in one of our district schools. Probably safe to say we actually have a higher ratio of counselors to students in some of our rural areas, which has been really beneficial. We've actually been able to add a few supports in both our northern region and the eastern region. So that's been good, but it's the same process. Reach out through your school and then we'll make those connections as we go.
Thank you, Brent. Okay, so I'm going to ask the panelists and Dr. Barrett to bring out your crystal ball because the next question is a crystal ball question. Do we expect there to be more closures this year? And how are virtual mental health service accessed in the event of those closures? And again, I'll invite a panel member to answer it.
I can jump in. Well, we're very much, as much as parents, schools are and school boards are hoping that our students and staff are able to remain in schools throughout the year. We do not have a crystal ball, so I cannot guess as to what that would look like, although we're following guidelines and in daily communication with the Ministry of Education and different public health services or units across the territories that we're serving. For accessing, if we do go back online, there are specific, en français, ça serait des feuilles de route. I guess it would be kind of like a protocol or guideline for our students. We share a lot of resources with families online through our student and our parent portals around different services that are available in the communities, as well as how to access services through the school. Our social work team does offer team sessions if the student and or the family feels comfortable doing that, we can also do it by telephone if that is a more comfortable way of doing the touch bases or the sessions that way. But we do continue to support our students, and I'm not sure if there's something that somebody else would want to add.
Sure, Michelle, I'll go a little bit. Thanks for that. Yeah, so I agree with what Michelle was saying. And, you know, I think sometimes people might have an assumption that maybe the school boards have more information about these shutdowns, lockdowns than we do. And that, you know, for some reason, because of bureaucracy or red tape, we're not able to share with families, that sort of thing. But typically we're learning about these shutdowns and lockdowns at the same time as all our families. And so we understand it's really difficult to shift in your thinking and to get ready for a brand new situation like that. If a situation like that were to happen again, just like Michelle was saying, our services continue, including mental health. And so immediately we'll be prepared to offer that virtual support over the phone when it comes to the individual work with students and families. And in regards to equity, given some families don't have the same access to some electronic devices or strong internet connection as well, the boards have been able to help out with that quite a bit and get that tech out to our families. So certainly if that was an issue, that's something that we can help you to resolve so that you can access the mental health support as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Jared. And it's great to know that there are resources available to children and their families to ensure that continuity of service. And that's wonderful. So I'm going to move to the last question. And again, I invite all the panelists. This is a bit of a broader question here, but what are some of the mental health partner services available in schools? And if I was a parent, how do I access them?
I think that's a great question. Certainly Jeannie touched on some. Certainly the ones that came to mind the quickest for me, Jeannie had mentioned, but we do rely on AFS to bring some of those services into our schools, especially in areas where we don't have maybe specialized programming. So something like AFY that really focuses on addiction services. We work very closely with them. And they have a presence in all of our elementary schools as well with the grade 7-8 program. When it comes to how to access them specifically, a lot of times if you were to go through either channel, that channel is going to have an awareness of the other. So if you were to go through, you know, the school board for a referral for mental health services, and that student happened to qualify really well for something like AFI or something like the school-based support program, those counselors and those people at that school will be able to flag that, and vice versa as well. Going through an intake at AFS, they're going to be familiar with what kind of services you might be able to get from the counselors within our boards. So we work really closely that way.
Yeah.
I just added in the, sorry, thanks, Jared. I also added in the chat that we do have mental health and addiction nurses in all 4 of our school boards. So we share the nurses, and they're same way that you would refer for your child by speaking with the principal, or if they already have a link with part of the mental health teams, then sometimes we're referring internally. So there's different pathways to get to a mental health and addictions nurse. But if a good example would be if your child has been prescribed a medication to help with, say, ADHD or a mental health problem, and then it's new to them, or there's a change in medication, that would be a great opportunity for us to link you to the mental health nurse to answer some of those questions around side effects or things you should be looking out for, or any questions that you would have, and link back that some of those questions to the psychiatrist, the pediatrician, etc. They also do psychoeducation and support for the family, so for you as parents and caregivers, and directly to the student as well. So great extra resource. Pour les conseils francophones, on travaille aussi avec le Centre Victoria pour femmes. Donc, elles viennent dans nos écoles où font du travail 1 à 1, travaillent l'estime de soi, des relations saines, etc. Donc, un autre bon partenaire pour nous.
Yeah, I think one of the key things for us really is that it's important to think of it as a community of care. School boards essentially focus on promotion of positive mental health and prevention, so we can take on some of the early intervention pieces and provide supports to students that way. But we really depend on our community partners and supports to provide that more intensive treatment and assessment services, because that's not something school boards are really equipped or outfitted to do. So we really rely heavily on all of our community partnerships. And I think the 4 boards in our area have a great partnership with Sioux area hospitals, for instance. If we have students that are transitioning from child and adolescent psychiatry or crisis intervention with return to school processes and that. So that's been really helpful and is somewhat unique within the province. And a number of great programs that we've been able to partner with AFS on. For instance, we've run Rebound North in our schools the last couple of years. And the last couple of years, we've been able to put a process in place where some of our senior students can get credits for being group facilitators with some of those groups. And actually the shift online this year has been really helpful because we've been able to put that programming in with whole classes throughout our system. So that's been a great partnership too. But there are lots of different partners and agencies that come into our schools and help us with providing services. And we really rely on the whole circle of care around kids to provide the services that we need to.
Thank you, Brent. Well, I'm going to, in the last few minutes that we have, invite the participants to forward or ask any questions that you might have. Take care, everyone, and hopefully we can do this again later in September. All the best.